I will put this on YouTube later. Okay, so I will be reading today. Hello, I am Lynn Oakwood, well, also known mostly as Mevidia. Lynn Oakwood is my pen name, and I will be reading now Alassian Born, my epic fantasy book. And yes, here is the prologue. Shall we go? It was a wooden gate in the closed fence surrounding the garden. It was very big and dark, with thick mahogany doors that shone in the sunlight. It wasn't magical or special. Father had said there were things in the world that were special, but this wasn't one of them. This was just a wooden gate. And yet, to the child, sometimes it didn't seem like a gate at all. Sometimes it shimmered, filling with minuscule lights that quivered and fidgeted, bumping into one another, pushing and pulling. He could see shapes beyond it, shapes made of colorful, bright lights that didn't stand still, but moved like living things, walking this way and that, beating wings in the sky, shaking branches in the wind. They did all the things that living things do. There was a world beyond the gate, a world he could glimpse through the fabric of the gate itself. Father called it the outside. Outside, there were voices. Not voices that the child could hear, but voices that just were. Only they hadn't always been. That began being the first time the gate had not seemed like a gate, and they had not stopped being since. Chapter 1. The Child. He woke to the chirping of a bird perched on the sill of his open window, his eyes heavy from a tiring, troubled night. He sat up and rubbed the dribble from his mouth with the heel of his fist. The sun was low, hidden beneath the branches of the trees, but the day had begun to warm. It was already time. He gasped. He bolted out of bed, crashing clumsily into the door trim before stumbling through, missing the first step down the staircase. He caught the wooden handrail and hugged it tightly, proceeding to descend each step carefully till his feet found the safety of the short grass. He ran, calling out as he crossed the shaded garden, "Father! Father, can I go with you?" Mirithel paused with a hand against the gate. The many long braids of his chalky hair brushed the grass, swaying gently before catching up to the new state of things, becoming still. When he turned, the rays of morning lit a frown on his face. He gazed down, his ivory eyes each inked with only the tiniest black pupil. He said, "Not today, child." "Then when can I go?" "When you are older." How much older? He had not been old enough the last time this had happened, and he was now nearly 4 years old. "When you have grown to match my height," his father said. "Now stay with Tashira. I shall be back soon." Tashira roared sleepily from somewhere among the garden trees. Then she was silent. He sat in the grass watching the gate doors close and hide his father from sight. The morning dew wet his naked legs and small braids. But that particular problem did not concern him. A much bigger problem did. It had taken him well over 3 years to become as tall as he was now, and unless he found a better way to do it, it would likely take him another 3 or even 4 years to match his father's height. That would simply not do. He was done with staying at home, done with being left behind, and done with being a child. He wanted to see the wonders beyond the gate, to meet his strangers that lived outside, and to go with his father into the forest he'd glimpsed all about. Home was not always a bad place to be, and actually, it was usually just fine. It was a great house of living trees, of wooden walls, a roof made of reeds, and far above a green canopy of leaves. Great roots stretched out from the ground like folds of clothes, so tall that he had to bend his head back and look up to the sky to see where they merged into trunks. The hot sun shone over a garden of grasses and weeds and berry-laden shrubs, and the air smelled of flowers. The yellow lion prides, with their manes of round petals, the tiny white whispers huddled densely in clusters, and the red tulips, their cups raised to the skies. He knew the trees that made his home were very old. His father had told him so. He also knew that trees required plenty of water and sun to grow. So when the sun rose above the highest branches, he walked to the green pond at the garden's heart and stepped in the middle of it. He stood there like a tree, his arms outstretched to the blue sky. The water nuzzled his hips. He didn't feel himself getting any taller, only tired and slightly cold. When Tashira woke from her long nap, she demanded he came out of the pond and play with her. He chased her as she bounded about the garden, and she let him climb on her back and hustled him around in a frenzy. But when their games bored her, she went to lick her black fur dazzling clean and dozed off in the sun, leaving him alone with his worries. In the late afternoon on the following day, his father returned, looking disheveled, with a bright red dot painted on his forehead and a line on his lips. Father kneeled to kiss him on the cheek, then, without a word, headed up the spiral staircase to the warm wooden rooms overlooking the garden. He followed upstairs. "Why can't I go with you?" Father leaned his ivory sword against the wall and bent to untie the laces of his leather boots. His hands moved wearily, yet with urgent impatience. "I am tired, child," Father said. These words were of no use to him, because already his own eyes, which had been light and lively before Father's return, had since become heavy and slowed with a terrible drowsiness. He pouted and watched Father undress, toss his white robe at a chair, miss, pick it up, and hang it over the back. Father lay on the white puffy cotton mattress, pulled the sheets over himself, and closed his eyes. At last, peeking toward him, Father said, yawning, "It isn't safe for a child." He too yawned. He rubbed his sleepy eyes with his fists, then yawned again. His steps were light and silent over the wooden floor. He climbed onto the wide mattress, slipped under the sheets, huddled close to his father's warmth, and soon fell fast asleep. "Take me with you," he said one day when he was 5. He was in his room above the garden, sitting on his small bed still warm from the night's sleep. The first light of morning came through the open window. "You know I cannot do that." "But I can hunt with you. I can." Hunt, he had learned, was what his father did when he was gone for days. Sometimes one day, sometimes 2 or 3. Once, it had been more days than he could even count, although back then he had been too small to add past the number of his fingers, and in turn he could not be sure it had been as many days as that, because once or twice he'd forgotten how many fingers he'd already counted. He had done a great deal of crying when his father had come home at last, ill and weak. "I do not need you to hunt with me, child. What I need is that you stay hidden, that you stay safe. You stay here." Father's gaze was earnest, and his word final. "I must go now." Burning tears filled his eyes as Father turned his back to him. His lips began to tremble. He did not watch him go, but curled into a ball under the bedclothes and breathed in damp air, sweltering in his own breath. When he could no longer bear the heat, he slipped the linen from his head and used it to dry his eyes and nose. Later that day, he perched on the ball of his feet in the warm grass, his lips pursed tight and a frown pushing his brows down. The closed gate stood mockingly in front of him. From each of the two doors, a thick twisted handle hung some distance above the ground. He reckoned that if he stretched himself on his toes, he could reach the handles with only the tips of his fingers. But he would definitely reach them. "I'm going out," he said. Tashira made not the slightest move. Her huge black feline form lay seemingly asleep in front of the doors. Her pretense did not fool him. He had pondered the matter long that morning, back in his room. There would be no stopping him. He rose upright. "I know you hear me." Tashira opened a round yellow eye, as big as a full-grown apricot, and looked at him. She did not move. "Let me pass," he ordered. The Kara opened her other eye and stood up on her hefty furry legs. She was much, much taller than he was. She bent her head down so that her snout almost touched his nose. Then she growled. Between her black lips flashed walls of pointy yellow teeth. A thick fang split apart, her pink tongue flattened against the floor of her mouth, and a roar boomed out of her. But his mind was made up, and he was not afraid. He brought forth focus to his eyes and made them shine with ruby light. He watched Tashira's shape brighten with the inner flow of her energies. He no longer saw black fur. Instead, he saw the life's movements within her body, the beating of her heart, the seeing of her eyes, the thinking of her mind. Her shape was dense and smooth as marble, yet it shimmered from within with strength and motion. He raised a hand and ushered her aside, gently, because father had taught him he must be kind to the weak. Against her will, the forest cat plodded away from the gate. Then she stood immobile in the grass and watched him. He let his focus wane and his sight stilled. Stretching on his toes, he reached for one of the metal handles. He could only just touch it. Leaning against one door, he slipped his fingers behind the handle of the others and pulled. The city of Irieth dwelled at the heart of a lush jungle of ages past. Houses fashioned from wood and living trees hid beneath the green line of the high canopy as a coral reef lying unseen in the depths of the sea. Its people were wise and long-lived, with pale skin, white hair, and ivory eyes. They called themselves Alassians and counted the years of their lives in centuries. The children born in the city were few, only one every decade or two, so that all children were known by all and loved by all. For life was precious to the Alassians, and especially that of a rare child of their kind. So when a boy 3 feet tall, dressed in loose garments of rosewood red, made his appearance outside the keeper's home in bright daylight, a slight figure in the thin gap between hefty doors, the Alassians came to stare and wonder. The child stood still and watched them in return. Until then, he had only known one other who was the same as he. Alassian, and not a creature of the wild, his father, Miriasol. Now he saw others, many others, tall people gathering round, talking to one another, looking at him. Fear came into his heart and held him speechless. One of the people stepped forward. The rope, brown like the earth, whispered in the grass, step after step until it stopped. The boy looked up at the face smiling down at him, but he did not see it smile. He saw it grin. The stranger spoke, but the boy did not hear the words, for his heart beat too loudly. He turned and ran. Through the garden, past the pond, up the stairs, and into his room. He shut the door with a slam and sank his weight against it, hugging his knees with his arms. There he shook with sobs, and he dried his cheeks, and he cried, and he sobbed. When Keeper Miriatel returned to Irius, bearing the red marks of a hunt, he found the gate to his home open and a crowd gathered outside. He walked through the people quickly and stiffly. They asked him questions about a boy, a little one, who was in that room. Where? Up there, hiding. He'd been hiding in that room for the better part of the day. I shall go see this boy, the keeper said. He pushed the heavy gate closed, slowly and silently. Outside, the crowd lingered until sunset. Then calm fell. Miriathel stood by the garden pond, his gaze trapped in its shallow depths, where a maze of weeds lay blackened by the night. Tashira, darker than darkness, circled around him and around the hole in the ground. She looked at her sire's face. Her sire stared unmoving into the pond, deep in thought. It had been 5 long years. Only now was Irius beginning to resemble a shadow of itself, the memory of the loss fading away. And now, would they ask the question now? Would they ask about their guardian, their strength, their heart? All they had seen was a child, and the child was no guardian. The guardian was will of steel and heart of fire, the mightiest and most adept of Alassians. The power did not belong with the young and untrained. The ruby light had faded, reunited with the flow of the world. Lost, it must be sought anew. Miriathel had named this the truth 5 years ago, and he alone knew otherwise. Except that, now, they had seen the boy. The following day there was a knock on the gate. Miriathel emerged from within with the look of one who had kept vigil through the night. Outside his home, in the feeble morning light, stood a Falin, a male Alassian, with an old and stern face. The Falin's long hair fell to his feet in thin braids that lay on the ground behind him, fine as a blanket of frost. His voice was stout and bitter. The two spoke for long, the visitor now and then peering behind the keeper's shoulders through the doors left ajar, and the keeper seemingly untroubled by the intrusion. That day Miriathel spoke to anyone who sought him out, neither denying nor confirming the truth, agreeing only to what had been seen. A boy came out of this home. A boy ran into that room. Had there been a boy? So he had been told. Did the boy live in this home? A boy had lived in this home. Who was this boy? A young child, it seemed. Who were his parents? That he had not been told. He spoke humbly and patiently, and one by one all the visitors were turned away. The afternoon was beginning to darken when a furious banging shook the gate. Outside stood a tall young Falin, his face marked with a thick line of red paint over the eyes. Miriathel met the silent glare with unease, then stood aside to let this Falin in. Alone in his room, the boy had not eaten or slept since the day before. His father had not tried to come in, but had asked for the door to be opened. The door remained closed. He was still afraid, terrified, though not of the people, not since yesterday. At first, between one shameful sob and another, he had realized with horror that in his hasty escape he had left the gate open. He had listened hard for anyone who might come in, but no one had. And returning home, father had closed the gate. Through the long hours of the night, nothing more had happened. In the morning, there had been a coming and going of people. None, however, had gone past his father and entered their home. So he no longer feared the people outside. Yet an unexplained dread filled him, and the slightest noise made him gasp with a pounding heart. When presently Dystopian was let in, the boy at last got out of bed and ran to the door. There he stopped like a fly caught in a web, hands against the wood, heart beating fast. He listened intently, though not with his ears, for he was too far to hear the words spoken. Dystopian's heart was angry and fierce. His rage roared like the squall before a storm. Suddenly he yelled, and his voice slashed against the closed door and was muffled. Curiosity won over the fear. The boy reached for the knob, pulled the door open, and crept to the stairs. He saw below him, in the garden, his father and a stranger deep in argument. Tashira, like a shadow, circled them both with a predator's pace, slow and deliberate, her big yellow eyes on the stranger. He was a slim figure with wide shoulders and strong arms, taller than father by a few inches. The color brown was all about him. Baggy brown trousers that stopped tight at the knees, a dark brown leather jerkin, and a white brown sash at the waist. Into the sash he carried two black sheathed swords with polished bronze handles. His hair was pure white, brighter than father's chalky tone, and shorter. It was plain instead of braided, and tied in a narrow stream that hung behind his back, brushing his thighs when he moved. "I will hear none of your riddles," the stranger was saying. His voice, although irate, was still very clear. "No more, keeper. Have you lied to me?" Father did not reply. "Is he? Or is he not? Answer me!" His command snapped like the cracking of a whip. Father averted his gaze a moment, then quietly said, "Forget what you think you have learned, please. None of it must leave these walls. No one can hear of it." "I have learned nothing," barked the stranger. "You have told me nothing. If you want my silence, then give me the answer I seek. Talk!" "You must quiet your anger," Mevidia said. "You must learn to be patient." "Why are you doing this to me?" cried the stranger, and the strain in his voice betrayed despair. "I was left with nothing. Now Why? Why won't you answer me? You are cruel. You are hurting me, and I have done you no wrong." "I am sorry, young one." There was a pause. Silent, unspoken words. Stares. "If you say nothing, I shall have to ask him. Where is he? Where is the boy?" Mevidia stood silent. "Then keep your secrets. I will look for him myself." The stranger turned, and quick as a shadow, Tashira bounced in his way, growling and hissing, big and browning and black as pitch darkness, almost as tall as he. Nimbly the Falling drew a sword and held it between himself and the Kara. Glaring at her with hard rage, he said slowly, so that his words were clear and full of silence, "Do not try to stop me, or I will fight you both." I seek answers, not blood. Yet blood will spill if you demand it. But after he had spoken, his hand began to tremble. His grip wavered. His sword fell on the grass with a dull thump. His gaze searched the garden, then flicked to the stairs. There, he saw the boy. He was small and thin, fair-skinned, and with snow-white hair less than an inch long, as is true of all Alassian children his age. But his eyes shone bright red, as none of the children's do. He was crying silently, his lips pressed together, his brows furrowed, and heavy tears dripping from his chin. Without speaking or moving, the Falin watched the boy cry and sob a little, the glow of his eyes slowly fading until they turned white and dull, the power stowed away. Then the keeper spoke. He is, but no one must know. I beg of you. The stranger collected his sword from a bush of white whispers that had flattened beneath its weight, and sheathed it. Again he looked up at the boy. No one will know, he said. His gaze lingered a moment in scrutiny. Then he turned and left. That's it, my friends. The end of the first part of Chapter 1.